All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you happen to be. My name is Christopher Harrison, and this is Web Wednesday, the show where I bring on people that are much smarter than me to talk about cool things web dev. Now, about 2 months ago or so, I was fortunate enough to have Aaron Powell on to chat about React, and we actually took a look at a lot of really cool things that you can do inside of React. We took a look at hooks, we took a look at state, and just a lot of other just kind of neat odds and ends, some kind of neat things that you could do. And so as Aaron and I were chatting, we're both huge TypeScript fans. We thought, hey, let's go ahead and come back and do something with both TypeScript and React. Because what we're going to see is that TypeScript is going to help make your React writing a lot simpler because of, among other things, the fact that you're going to be able to identify data types, which is just a wonderful thing to be able to do. Not only does it eliminate a full class of bugs, but it can also then help give you better autocomplete and IntelliSense and so forth. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring Aaron on, who is literally coming right back from vacation or holiday, as he would say down in Australia. So thanks for coming back and like jumping right into this.
Well, there's nothing like
Uh-oh.
going straight in
Why can I not
to
hear you?
an easy start for your first day back.
That's fantastic. Um, this is great. Um,
Yeah. So I,
oh,
if anything comes off disheveled, it's because I'm still not fully awake.
hold on. Um, Weird. Let's try and talk again for me real quick. I want to just make sure that I can hear
Yeah,
you.
I am.
There we go. Now I can hear
Okay.
you. Okay. I just had to
I
unplug and
think I
plug
just
back
had the
in.
levels a bit low. Yeah.
No, it was
Whoops.
on my side. It was on my side. So yeah. Anyway, yeah. Like I said, Aaron literally came back from vacation not like 30 seconds ago. We got all of this set up, so we were just doing a last little bit of troubleshooting here. So see, what you're seeing is live here.
This is live TV.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Cool. All right. So, Aaron, let's sort of start here. Who are you? Who is Aaron Powell?
Uh, the guy on screen now. I work for Microsoft as well. I'm part of the Cloud Advocates team. So I've been doing web development for like, I say at least 15 years because I stopped counting at 15 years. So I remember targeting browsers like Netscape and IE5 and stuff like that, doing front end and trying to do front end web development against them. So I've had a lot of experience in that kind of space. But these days I do a mix of .NET, JavaScript, and TypeScript, predominantly web focused things. So that's the kind of stuff that I play around with. And I've been doing React since it was point 0.7 or point 0.8 was the first version of React that I used. And it was just because it was something new that we hadn't tried at the company I was working for. So we thought, well, let's compare it to the other front end libraries that were in the market. There's like Angular and Knockout and Backbone, if people remember those days. And since then, I just love using it. I love the programmatic model of it. I love the structure that it defines. And then when they came out with support for TypeScript as like a first class citizen of the way that you can build React applications, I was fully sold. I've been sold on TypeScript since it first came out, coming from like a .NET and C# compiled language background. Having a type safe way of doing JavaScript just made things so much saner in my mind.
Yeah, I agree completely that making that transition into TypeScript, especially as a former C sharp, I shouldn't, well, no, I guess I can kind of say former C sharp. Like I haven't touched C sharp in forever, but sort of as a former C sharp developer, it's a very natural transition into TypeScript. But let's do this. Let me ask you this question then right up front. Let's start defining some terms here. What is TypeScript?
Right. So TypeScript is, well, it's a superset of the JavaScript language. So it's still plain old JavaScript. You can write plain JavaScript exactly as you're writing today in .js files. But instead of using .js as the file extension, you change it to .ts, which is TypeScript. And what this does is it then gives the TypeScript, which is the TypeScript compiler, which is a thing that will process the language. But you might be familiar with other sorts of compiler-esque aspects to JavaScript, like Babel, if you wanted to use features that are not supported in all JavaScript runtimes, you want to convert them down to something that works everywhere. The similar idea with TypeScript. We can take our superset of the JavaScript language, being TypeScript, which allows us to do type annotations. Say we know that something's always going to contain a number, so we explicitly state that it can only contain a number. So if we would ever try and assign a string to that variable, which is perfectly legitimate JavaScript, you can convert something from a number to a string inside of the same variable. Well, the TypeScript compiler will say, "Hang on a sec, are you sure you wanted to do that?" and give you an error. But this kind of compiler safety, being able to understand the data types that we're working with, the shapes of objects, means that as we build out more and more complex applications, we can understand how data is being used in that application, what the shape of that data is, and then make sure that we're using it the way that it was intended to be used. We're not passing a number where we were expected a string, or a function when instead of we wanted an object, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things. Like the great part about JavaScript is that it lets you do whatever it is that you want to do, and just trust that you know what it is that you're talking about. And of course, the bad thing is that it will let you do whatever it is that you want to do, and trust that you know what you're talking about. And yeah, I very rarely, if ever, know what it is that I'm talking about. So yeah.
Yeah.
One of the other things I really like about TypeScript, and you touched on it a bit with Babel, is it also then helps smooth over some of the edges when it comes to JavaScript. That I've been in web dev for about as long as you have, and if you would have told me back then that we'd be doing the things with JavaScript that we're now doing with them today, I'd have looked at you like you had three heads. Like it's just not possible. And in a lot of ways, it's still sort of not, that we are using JavaScript in a lot of ways it wasn't designed for, but TypeScript really does help smooth out some of those edges.
Sure. And it just makes it a lot easier to build, or at least in my experience, it's made it a lot easier to build applications that are a lot more complex, that might have larger dev teams that are working across them. And some things like that is where I find TypeScript really makes its value proposition strong. It might not be right if you're just a single person working on an application that's got half a dozen files. There's definitely value. I'll still do it that way. But if you're working in a team and you've got people that are working on different shared components, or they're working on different service layers, even like you could build a client and server application. So where you've got like a Node.js backend and a React front end, being able to share the data types between those, so that that when you're doing a call to a REST endpoint or to a GraphQL endpoint, here is the shape of the data that you're getting back. And we've just got that same set of types shared back and forth. So we can enforce that the client respects what the server is sending, and vice versa.
100%. Like the way that I try to convince everybody that they should be using TypeScript is just, let me create this interface for you and then show you how this works. Like that ability to be able to define those types and be able to share them is such a huge thing, and it makes you so much more productive, because then you don't have to stop and remember. It's like, okay, did I call it user? Did I call it username? Did I call it user ID? And if I called it user ID, yep, was it lowercase ID? Was it capital I, lowercase d? You don't have to worry about any of that, because the interface, the type will tell you what that is. So cool. And real quick,
exactly. And I think anyone that's worked with a compiled language will know that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And if you've got that C# background, let me ask you this real quick. And we've had you on before to talk about React, so even just the short version works real well here. But what is React?
Right. So React is a library for building user interfaces. Predominantly web user interfaces, but we can do mobile. I've actually seen people do like console applications using React as a library and a paradigm. But let's park those. We're talking about web today. It's Web Wednesday. It's not console application. There's no day of the week that starts with C. I should have thought that a little bit further ahead. But the idea is that we've got this library that's just designed for building interfaces. It's not going to tell you how to do the rest of your application. It just wants data, and it wants to build HTML so that you can then have that displayed. But it does this in a very much a functional programming-esque model. So things are designed around immutability. So you don't change data, you just create new data from the existing data. It is designed around being a very component-centric view of an application. So if I wanted to create a form to have input field, multiple forms across my site, well, I would create the same input field as a shared component so that it can be used in multiple locations, and we have them looking and operating exactly the same in multiple places. So that's kind of React, I guess, in a nutshell. It was popularized by Facebook. They're the ones that created it. But as an open source project, it's definitely evolved beyond what Facebook initially designed it for.
Okay. And so then why are TypeScript and React so great together?
Well, I mean, I think I think TypeScript's great for pretty much any JavaScript application. So it's kind of a moot point. We're building JavaScript, so we may as well use TypeScript. But moreover from that is that if we're building particularly shared components, so we've got something that is it's a component that's going to receive some data. Well, that might have been created by a different team in our engineering stack. Well, how do we know what data that component needs? Well, one way is that we go and we walk over to that team and we ask them, or we look at the wiki article that they've created for it, and we assume that the wiki is up to date, or that the person we're talking to has got the most relevant information because they've worked on it recently. But there's kind of that opacity of like, well, how do we know that what we're doing is the correct way? So with TypeScript, we can use the TypeScript type definitions that it exposes to say this component expects data of this shape. Like it expects these properties on our component. These properties have if this property is an object, here are the fields of that object, so on and so forth, so that we can then understand that just by working with the component itself. But we can also then get that compiler safety of when we use that component, if we pass something incorrect, well, we get a compile error so we don't accidentally ship a bugged application through to a test environment or even production.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Navetta asks, I think, kind of an interesting question, which is, will TypeScript be the standard in the future?
I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't categorically say one way or the other. But I don't think that we would ever see TypeScript as like a language that is inherently run by JavaScript engines in whether it's the browser or whether it's Node or anything like that. That's not to say that there aren't things that TypeScript might be able to help influence decisions and directions around improving the way that we do JavaScript. And that's also not to say that there aren't projects out there that are influenced by TypeScript and having TypeScript as a first-class citizen in the way you build applications. The Dino project, for example. Dino is an alternative to Node.js, so it's still technically JavaScript on the server, but instead of it being JavaScript as the language that you're expected to write in, you actually write things as TypeScript. And then it will take care of the compilation step for you and building out that the JavaScript that will be run by the underlying JavaScript runtime. So while TypeScript itself might not find its way into browsers, like you might not find it running in Edge or Chrome or Firefox or anything like that, there might be other projects that adopt it as a more of a first-class citizen. And yeah, I think the influence that TypeScript can have in this is maybe how we can improve certain aspects of the language or be a use case for prototyping new language features. I think that's where we will see TypeScript play its role going forward still.
Okay, all right. So what does a TypeScript React project look like?
So probably the easiest way to do this is let's jump over and have a look at a demo.
Yeah.
It's
Sort
probably
of the perfect setup
the
here.
best way, rather than two talking heads going at it. Let's jump over to some code and pretend that we know what we're doing.
Actually, I'm going to interrupt real
So
quick.
we're going to build a TypeScript. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna interrupt real quick, only just because a great question came in, which I think is perfect, like right before the demo, which is from Kevin, who asked a question.
Oh yeah.
If I'm new to React, should I start learning TypeScript first before building my application?
That is a really good question. Now, if you're new to React and new to TypeScript at the same time, I don't see that you would necessarily need to go and learn one before the other. I'm someone who very much believes that you should learn the fundamentals. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, learning TypeScript is not really that much different because it's a superset of the language. So it adds things to JavaScript, and you can opt into as much or as little of TypeScript as you want. Similarly, then with React, you don't have to go really deep into using TypeScript with React. Like, you don't have to create these enormously complex TypeScript type definitions to work with React and TypeScript. You can still get some value out of it by just kind of adding a sprinkle of it to the edges. So I would actually try and learn them both concurrently, because as we'll see shortly when we spin up a project, it's actually really easy to set up a brand new project with React and TypeScript together. So that's kind of what we'll have a look at, I guess, in the playing around in a bit of a demo.
Okay, all right. Well, since you've set us up yet again, let's see a demo here.
Okay, and I'm going to click on the right thing in my toolbar. Here we go. And for this, we're going to use Create React App. So Create React App it's an application generator that Facebook have produced as a way to quickly get started in bootstrapping a TypeScript application, a React application. So if you haven't checked it out, it's at create-react-app.dev. And this is just a node package that we can install. What's really great about this is that we can use it with TypeScript very easily, and they have docs that will show us how to do that. So the way that we do this is we can use npm or yarn, depending on what your preference of package manager is. I prefer npm, so we're going to be using npm for this. And we use that with the npx. So this is just going to execute that generator application. We'll give it a name, and then we can specify a template, and that template being TypeScript. The reason that we have this template flag is that if you wanted to use something like Flow, which is another approach to doing type-safe JavaScript. Flow was developed by Facebook for their internal stuff, but a lot more projects seem to be going down the direction of TypeScript than they are with Flow. So that's why I'm definitely more of a fan of it. But we're going to generate an application using this. So let's jump over to my terminal again, and we'll go npx create React app, and we'll do it in the current directory, and we'll do the template as TypeScript. So this is going to spin up just a really basic application, but it's also going to stand up a bunch of what React, or at least the React community has agreed upon in terms of defaults. So things like linting tools and linting rules. So what are we going to be using to ensure code style and formatting and things like that? We got to install the package because I haven't got it on my machine at the moment.
Your
so
machine
it's going
is
to
just
set
coming
those sorts
back
of
from
things up.
vacation
It's
as
going
well.
to set up. Yeah, my machine is still waking up. And if this takes too long, I've got one that I've prepared earlier, and we can jump to that demo instead.
No, this is good.
But yeah, things like Webpack as well. Yeah, we'll get this in editing. It's not live, is it? Oh wait, no, it is. Whoops. Damn, we'll just have to do filler talk. That's what you do on Talkback Radio when things are taking longer than expected.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do we fill?
Exactly.
So,
I'm digging this 4-second delay as you everything that I'm saying has to get out to Australia, and everything from Australia has to get out to here. It's like clearing customs, the whole thing.
Yeah, and also I recently moved house, and the internet comes into the front room of our house, and of course my office is one floor up, and then at the very back of the house, and this is an old townhouse with double brick walls, And we all know how good Wi-Fi is through things like double brick, across multiple floors, across multiple rooms. So I'm enjoying all the powers that is Australian internet at this point in time. Anyway, yeah. So as I was saying, this is going to stand up a bunch of the agreed upon defaults that we've got. You don't need to learn something like Webpack because Webpack can be quite a complex and difficult tool if you're first getting started to work out how do you do bundling and minification and compilation of the TypeScript down to JavaScript so it can run in the browser. Also, with a React application, we're going to be using the JSX, or more accurately, the TSX syntax, which is an extended version of JavaScript that allows us to embed the React components within inside of it. So that will then compile down to plain JavaScript because it's not going to run natively within inside of the browser. So that's all what we'll get with inside of this template when it does eventually install.
We can just keep stalling long enough.
Just while that's happening, a bit more about. Yeah, I was going to say, just have a bit more of a look at the sorts of things that Create React App is going to set up for us, so that we don't have to plug into them too much in the editor when it gets there. So obviously, it's got a getting started that talks to you about what the project is, how to use it initially, and things like that. But another really interesting thing that it'll do for us is it'll actually set up testing. So if you're a developer that is unlike myself and too lazy to write tests, and I tend to just go, oh yeah, my code's fine, it doesn't need tests. Create React App will actually go and stand up the test scaffolding for you using Jest as a test runner, so that you can test your JavaScript, your React application, and that's all set up and ready to go. So this is setting up like good behavioral patterns as well in the application that's deploying, not just trying to set you up the minimum amount of stuff so that you can get started. If I was going to be building my next production application, I definitely look at starting with Create React App. As someone who's been doing React for quite a while, I may not use that as my starting point because I'm familiar enough with some of the things it'll set up, but it's definitely a good starting point for it. It might become a little bit cumbersome down the track because of some of the ways that it sets up its defaults and that you don't have a lot of control over replacing those. So if you want to be able to modify some of the ways that it expects the application to run, that could give you a little bit of a challenge. But if that's the case, there is an option that, no, hang on a sec. It's under, I think, one of these sections. There's a concept in it called ejecting. I can follow that link there. So ejecting is where what it will actually do is it will uninstall Create React App and lift all of the defaults that it defined for you up into your project, so that instead of them being hidden away behind other NPM packages, they're in your project so that you can go in and override them by just modifying the Webpack config or the ESLint config or the Prettier config, because you want to change the linting rules, you want to change the formatting rules, you want to change the compilation with Webpack and all that sort of stuff. So this is something to look at if you're going to production and maybe you want to modify the application structure a little bit more for your style. Given that is still running along in the background, we're going to jump through to one that I've created earlier.
Still going.
Still going. It's not the kind of thing that's super speedy. And then we find out that everything is running awesomely fast on my machine. I've got a project here, which is, so this is probably why it's taking so long. I'm currently downloading a massive amount of Docker images in the background. We'll just go and reopen that in VS Code. So this is a slightly more complex React application, and we'll get in one day. This is from just one of my open source projects. And this is a React application that then has an API backend written in GraphQL. So what I want to show here is how we can do TypeScript with React, TypeScript on the server, and then do sharing of type definitions between them. But Let's start off by actually having a look at what a TypeScript React application looks like. So this is, as I said, the file extension that we would use is TSX instead of JSX, which is what we would use for a React application. And if we have a look at this, well, there's nothing in here that really makes it look like a TypeScript application compared to a traditional React application. I don't have any TypeScript idioms in here. We have our ES import statements, which is very common in React because we would use something to compile those down to be to work with inside of the browser if we're targeting browsers that don't support ES imports. We have some third-party components that I'm pulling in. I've got this Apollo provider, so I can do GraphQL. But because this is now a React with TypeScript application, if I hover over a component, we'll see that we're actually getting some more rich IntelliSense. So this is a React FC, which is short for function component. So this is a component that doesn't inherit from React component. So it doesn't use a class approach. It uses just a JavaScript function. If you go back and check the previous session that we did on React, I talked about the difference between function components and class-based components. And that's really whether or not you want to have state and complex lifecycle as that component. So that's where you use a class-based component. If you don't want to be managing state or you want to use React hooks to manage state, you would use a function component.
There's something big
but this then takes a generic argument.
There's something big here that I want to point out is, when you create a component in React, you of course are then to a certain extent, like, you're creating a brand new HTML element. And I know that that's not technically correct and blah, 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 but that's, like, in effect kind of what you're doing there is you're now creating something that you can use in a very similar fashion to HTML. And so it's fantastic that you're now seeing the IntelliSense on that item as well, which is not something that you're going to get if you're using JavaScript, that because of the fact that you've got that TypeScript, now you can see exactly what it is that's going on. And then you're about to highlight the fact that there's a generic there that you can also go in and play around with the props.
Exactly. And to your point around HTML components, so we've got a div here. My screen doesn't jump around. I've got a div here, which if we hover over it, it gives us quite a complex TypeScript insight into what that is. So it's a JSX element of a div, and then it's got a bunch of props available to it. But if I just hit space and then just do control space to trigger off the IntelliSense, well, here are all the different DOM properties that are available to a div. We have all of our ARIA information from an accessibility standpoint. If we scroll down a little bit further, we'll see that we've got things like ID, we've got events that could happen on it, so on and so forth. So let's just have a look. So something like on click, if we just would expand that, and this can either be assigned undefined, so we don't have to provide an on-click event, or if we do, and we use the squiggly brackets to indicate that we're going to put an event handler in here, we can see, well, it's giving us an error because, well, I must give it an expression. So that expression is going to take an argument, which could be the event, so the event, and then we'll just do console.log event, just as an example. Now I can hover over that and I can see that this event is also strongly typed. So I can see that this is a React, oops, if I keep the hover over, React, it's a mouse click event, that this was clicked on a div element. So that's going to be the input target, or sorry, the element target. And then the event arguments are going to be a mouse event so that I could access the fields off that. And then inside of here, I can do dot to get all the things that are available from that object as well. So I can find, if we go down and we'll have, there's target, and then the fields of that, because now it knows that the target, what could I do with the target, so on and so forth. So this is where React and TypeScript start becoming really powerful together, because I can get that insight into what I'm supposed to do with an element.
Somebody had asked...
this application has routing because it's got multiple pages.
Yeah,
Yep.
so somebody had asked, kind of real quickly. I obviously had missed a little bit of the beginning, which is fine. We'll take all viewers whenever they show up. But somebody had asked about, what are some of the things that TypeScript can help, it can help overcome. And you highlighted one of the biggest, which is knowing what the parameters are inside of an event handler, inside of a method. Because if something else is going to call it, I don't know exactly what those types are. And in fact, I was literally just writing some code earlier where I'm like having to go look up, okay, well, what's the silly property that's going to be coming in with this event arg, because I just couldn't remember it. So having it right there with the IntelliSense is so huge.
Yeah. And just while we were having that chat there, I went over and checked, and the template has now downloaded. So this
Yay.
is the Create React app that's been scaffolded up using the TypeScript template.
Okay.
We see in the sidebar on the right, we have a bunch of files. We have our app.tsx. We have our index.tsx, which is where the application entry point is. We even have some tests, but they're also written in TypeScript so that we could get type safe information inside of our tests. And this is using a testing library called testing library with its React support. And we can see like what is it doing, and we get IntelliSense support through that. But we won't worry about tests too much. We'll just look at the application itself. So this is our basic application that's been scaffolded up. And if I was to pop the terminal and we'll do npm start, run that up, we get our, it should pop, yep, there we go. It's popped into the browser. And we'll zoom that in.
Those tabs on the left was a feature I didn't know I needed until I had it. And now I don't know how in the world I lived life without it.
I know, as someone who never often opened a lot of tabs, I didn't like having the clutter across the top bar, but now that I do the left tabs, I have so many more tabs open frequently. But I also like having them really collapse down so I can maximize screen real estate that I've got here, but then just be able to hover over them and get the full information. Yeah, so I love having the tabs down the side as well.
Yeah.
Yep, there we go. Our React application is working. It's ready to ship to production because that's as complex as the application needs to be. But let's go with the canonical example and build a counter component. So we'll create a component, and I'm going to do this as a function component. So we'll call that counter. And then this is just going to return a, we'll do a div, and inside of that, we'll go a p tag, and the count is going to be count.
And for anybody who's not familiar, you'll notice here that he's literally able to just put that HTML right in with his JavaScript. So the peanut butter and the chocolate coming together. And he's frozen. And he's gone. Uh-oh. Hi. So apparently it's just going to be me for a minute here. Let's see. Hang asked the question, heard that TDD is very important when building an application. Can I recommend some courses, tutorials about React TypeScript with TDD focused? Unfortunately, I don't have anything at the moment that I could point you at. But it's a fantastic question. I unfortunately don't have a great answer for you. It looks like Aaron is back. Hi, Aaron. Welcome back.
Yep.
And
the application we're using to actually do this just crashed on the other screen.
Oh, that was nice of it. Let me get your screen share back in here. And there we go. Okay.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay.
Welcome back.
Yeah, we'll fix that in editing.
Yeah. Wait, there's no editing.
Damn it. Keep forgetting that. Okay, so as I was saying before I dropped off, we're building a counter application. And for those of you that aren't familiar with React, the TSX or JSX syntax allows us to build to use angle brackets within inside of our JavaScript. So we could put like div tags and p tags or our own custom components and so on and so forth, and we can put them in here. And then React, when it runs, will generate those out to be valid method calls against the React API to in turn make our UI appear.
Okay.
But yes, we've started building out a counter component.
By the way, are you typically a function person or a const fat arrow person?
Depends what I feel like. I often, like in my own code, I'll tend to do const and use the fat arrow. But often when I'm teaching, I will go function because people are more familiar with that as a keyword and as a pattern of creating functions than doing what are essentially anonymous lambdas. So start with the most common thing that people are going to come across, and then we can go to the advanced stuff down the track.
I agree. I went through a phase where it was just nothing but const fat arrow, and then I don't know. I sort of got over myself, and now I tend towards functions quite a bit more.
Yeah, but as we'll see as we're trying to use this, we have a little red squiggly, and that's because it's going, well, you've said you wanted a thing called count to appear here, but you haven't told me what that is, right? Okay. Well, that's because it's a prop that I want to pass in. So let's use so we could so this will come in as the first argument called props, or I would call it props, or we're going to just deconstruct that here. And great, cool. So we've now told the application where count's coming from, but TypeScript is still like, well, hang on a sec. It might be coming from there, but I still don't know what it is. If we have a look at the error message itself, it's saying that this is implied to be an any type. So an any is just TypeScript's way of going and throwing its hands up in the air going, I've got no idea what you're trying to do here. It could be a number, it could be a string, it could be an object, it could be a function, it could be anything. So maybe you want to help me out here and give us some information about what this actually is going to be. What is that argument looking like? What's that shape of it? And what are the types of the properties available within it? The reason that it does that is that, well, we have this rule turned on that says that we're not allowed to have implicit any's. So this is something that's turned on in our TypeScript config, and it's one of the rules that TypeScript sets by default in the compiler, because you want to try and avoid using any in your application, because the more any's that you have, the less value TypeScript can give you, because you're basically telling TypeScript, ignore this, ignore this, ignore this, ignore this. And the more you do that, well, then you start questioning what value is it going to be bringing. So we'll go ahead and define an object shape for that. So this will be called count, and that's going to be a number. And what I've done is I've put a colon here, which indicates that, so this is then how we would do a type annotation of an object in JavaScript. In TypeScript. So I'm annotating it with a type, which is just like an inline anonymous type here. And that count is going to be a number. So now if I hover over count, it knows that it's a number. And then here, count is a number. Excellent. So let's go and add this component to our application.
And you also could have created an interface out of that if you had wanted to be able to level that up and maybe share that out with something else if that was what you wanted to do.
Yep.
Yeah, look at that.
Yeah, and in VS Code, you'll see I've got this little light bulb that's just popped over here. So when I highlight that anonymous type, and then if I do Control Dot, which activates that code tip, it says, do I want to extract that as a type alias or as an interface? So I can do that, and then I would say, let's call this counter props. There we go. And then that's so we could extract that out, and then you could. So if you were sharing these across multiple files, then maybe we'd extract that out, and then you could have that interface as something you could use elsewhere.
Love it.
So I'm just going to delete out I'll just delete out the boilerplate code that's here, and we're going to put our counter in place. Counter. Awesome. So I've put it in place, but hang on a sec. Now we've got another red error. And it's telling us that the property count is missing because we're not passing any props to that component. So this is again where, like if we're doing a shared component design in React, which is the most common way that you would build React components, maybe I didn't realize that I needed to pass a default value for count here. Maybe I thought the count was always going to be managed by the counter itself. It's like, well, no, hang on a sec. You need to pass a value in here. So count will be, let's go, hello. And lo and behold, we get an error message because, oops, first off, counter is not what I called it. So it's going to tell us that, well, the property that I've given it, counter, doesn't match anything that's expected. And at the count, we'll now get an error saying, well, you've given us a string, but I expect a number here. So again, TypeScript is just making sure that I don't do, I could have like 0, it's come in from an API call and that it's a string, but so I've just passed it in and it's going, well, hang on a second. Now you've given me a string, but I really just wanted a number. So finally we'll put 0 there, save that. We'll come back through the browser and we get our value as we expect. So let's go ahead and have a look at how we can make that value change using React hooks and see what we can do with TypeScript and React hooks. So I need to import the React hooks. We'll put in use state. So React hooks, again, we talked about this last time we did a React session, but it's a way of managing state within inside of a function component, because a function component doesn't have state of its own, but we can use the React hooks APIs to set that up. So we're going to do, we'll create some state and we'll have the count and set count. And then use state. If we have a look over here in the type signature that's just popping a little bit behind my head, actually, if I do that, now it's not behind my head, we'll see that use state can take a generic argument. I'll expand that a bit further. There we go. It could take a generic argument, which is going to be S. That's just the label that they've given it in the type definition. And then that can be the initial state or a function that will return initial state. And then that generic argument is going to be returned as the first value of the deconstructed array. And then we'll have a function that will modify that. So if I just do nothing, we'll see that count is, well, it's undefined. It doesn't have a value associated with it. If I was to use the generic argument, I could say, let's click here, we go number. Now we know that count will be a number, or it could be undefined because we've not given it a default value. If I give it a default value of 0, count is now only ever going to be a number because we've initialized it, and I can remove my generic argument. So count is now, it knows that it's a number because it's inferred from 0 being a numerical value. It's inferred that that's the type. And set count will be an updater function that takes a number to update the count value. So now instead of passing this here, I can pass in count. That cascades through all correctly, and our UI still respects what we are expecting and works the way that we want it to work. So we could then add, say, a button and then have that being a plus symbol, and then we'll create another button, which is a minus symbol for increment and decrement. And we'll add an on click, which will take, this time we'll give it 0 arguments because we can ignore that first argument. I don't need the event argument that's happened from that click. Instead, we're going to do count. So we'll take, sorry, we'll set count, count plus 1. And then we'll just copy this line of code down. Pop it here, and instead of plus 1, we'll make it minus 1. Save that. And now our counter goes up and our counter goes down. And this is all done in a type safe manner. Like we know that that count, set counter requires a number passed to it. We know that count is going to be a number. We have our external component that just so happens to be a few lines above, but it could be coming from another file. It has a prop that it expects, which is a number, and we're passing it in a number as well. and inside of that, it's getting a number and it's outputting it. It's converting it to a string, so it can output it inside of that p tag. We would, if we were to change that and just do number here as the generic argument, now we would see a bunch of errors because, well, count, it could be a number, or maybe it hasn't been defined because it was never initialized. We can't pass it to our external component because it's a number or undefined, but I only want a number. So this is where I think TypeScript makes things so much more powerful.
I remember talking with Daniel, one of the PMs on the TypeScript team, and he says basically his job is to make red squigglies appear more often. And I think that there's definitely a lot of truth to that. Alvaro, by the way, wants to say hi to you, so I'm making sure that that happens. And then. Yep. Somebody by the name of D Trouble says that in their opinion it'd be better to use set count C and then the fat arrow C+1.
Yeah, yeah. So that and that's fair. So set count, or so the mutation function for a state value, it can either be given like the raw value, or you can give it a function which will receive the current state and then return updated state. So yes, so we could do C, and then instead of doing count, we'll do C+1, and then down here C -1. So for the simple example that we had here, it was less likely to be a problem, but the reason that you might want to use a function to update the state value is that you could end up with a race condition. So if I click the up and the down, like the plus and the minus buttons too quickly, and the state change hadn't cycled through fully, the value that was in count might not represent what was actually in the current state because React has tried to batch changes. And then I might decrement before the previous increment had happened. So it would decrement, but then it would increment by 2 because it didn't realize that the decrement had actually happened, and so on and so forth. So if you're dealing with if you're trying to mutate values where you need to look into current state and change the value of current state based off of something that is in the current state of that thing, then yes, you should probably use an updater function instead of the way that I had it. But yeah, there's going to be different scenarios where you want to use one versus the other. I could probably spend the next 11 minutes that we've got on show just talking about that part of hooks.
I don't know that would be the most exciting 11 minutes digging into that.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Well, given that we don't have a huge amount of time left, maybe we'll jump back to the more complex application and just have a look at React and TypeScript together in a bigger application. Do you think that sounds like a good thing?
Yeah, I think that sounds perfect.
Cool. So this one is, like I said, it's an application that's designed to work with both some client and some server information, and it's got a couple of different screens. So it's like it's a single page application. It's got a couple of different pages that you can navigate between. We need to share some data between them, and so it's a trivia game so that you can play trivia when you're stuck at home in lockdown orders and not allowed to leave the house. Not that I think anyone's experienced that recently, but
I don't know. You're in Australia.
At,
it's the future over there. I mean, like you're walking around without masks and life is normal.
Yeah, unfortunately though, we're having some issues with vaccine rollouts and stuff like that. So we currently don't have an idea of when we're going to be fully vaccinated and be allowed to travel freely around the rest of the world, which is a little bit sad, but c'est la vie. It could be a lot worse.
Yes.
very, very first world problem, that.
Indeed.
So I've picked one of the pages inside of the trivia application that we've got here, which is where you actually play the game. So this is so it'll start. It'll prompt you for questions, and it navigates through each of the questions that you have inside of game, and this is where you start seeing a lot more usages of TypeScript compared to that simple demo that maybe we had just before. So here we have use params, which is a React hook provided by React Router DOM, a library I'm using for navigation. And I'm receiving some parameters that I'm just creating an inline type alias for. So the ID of the game and the player ID, and I'm saying that those are going to be strings so that I can deconstruct that as two variables, ID and player, because I'm going to need to be able to pass like ID and player to different API calls that are happening, so on and so forth. I've got some state that I'm setting up here, which is going to be you get 30 seconds to complete a question before it automatically navigates you to the next question. We have the currently selected answer, which, well, is initially nothing because you don't have an answer until you select an answer. We're also, my scroll wheel keeps jumping up and down. That's all right. We have another React hook, which is going out and doing a GraphQL call to get some information about the game. We can see that we're passing through the current game ID to that and leveraging the fact that this one knows that it needs an ID passed to it as type string, which is a string because slightly further up, we defined it as a string. We're getting back questions that come back from, where are the questions? So yeah, we're iterating through an array. So I've got some questions that come back. They're going to have these few properties on them. We know that we can iterate over the answers because answers is an array of strings, and then we can generate list items that is what we display to the user so they can select their appropriate answer, and so on and so forth. So this is working with data that's coming back from a server with some TypeScript types that have been generated for me that are in a shared file between the client and the server, doing API calls, and it's all strongly typed. And if I was to say, well, ID is actually going to be a number, now we'll see that we get a bunch of cascading errors throughout our application. ID is expected to be a number here. It doesn't like that being passed through there. And then game ID is expected to be a string down here. So TypeScript is basically saying, hey, either the things that are trying to consume your data are incorrect, or the way that you're receiving your data is incorrect. You've got to work out where that mismatch is, because you're saying you've got a number and everything is expecting a string. You need to do that fix for yourself.
Yep.
Let's fix my compile error, save that, and leave it to go.
And by the way, one thing that I see that a lot of like new TypeScript developers, like a common mistake that they'll make is then they'll just start tagging everything as any, which sure that works, but effectively what you're doing at that point is you're just writing JavaScript with just like, fancier syntax. That you really do want to rely on this typing that you get from TypeScript. Like, this is one of the core reasons to use TypeScript.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not to say that it's inherently bad to approach it that way. So if I was coming to an existing application that had like a large JavaScript code base and I wanted to bring TypeScript into it, you don't want to try and spend the next like 3-4 weeks going through and maybe unpicking all the places where you do have maybe like the data type mismatches. I might start by like converting one file at a time to TypeScript, and then leveraging a bit more on any, and then instead of having it appear as a compiler error, have it more as a compiler warning, so that it's, well, I can validly use an any here, but I want to know that I'm maybe doing it wrong so that I can come back and correct it down the track, because it could be quite daunting to try and take an application maybe has a few hundred files in it and convert them all to TypeScript in one fell swoop, but instead just do it piece by piece. And rely on the fact that TypeScript can be a little bit loose if you need it to be loose, but allow you to bring that stringency back in later on.
I dig that. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
And can you show this little game of yours in action?
Yes, I should be able to actually. Make sure that I do have everything. Here we go. We'll run full stack and we'll find out if I do have all the dependencies installed. let's collapse everything. So this is an application. It's actually part of a workshop that I've got on doing GraphQL with React and TypeScript. So much bigger conversation than we're having today. And it's designed to be deployed to Azure Static Web Apps and use a Cosmos DB backend. So we've got an API that runs in Azure Functions. We've got data storage that is stored in Cosmos DB. We have a React application that is compiled from TypeScript, which we deploy as a static asset, and so on and so forth.
There's blob storage somewhere.
Pretty much, like we've got everything under the sun inside of it. But that's why I said it's a bit more bigger than.
Okay, that's my fault. I put you on the spot like that. I should know better.
No, oops. No, the reason it failed was so I actually normally run this inside of a dev container inside of VS Code. So that was the Docker container that I had downloaded in the background, because it requires a Node version 14, but I have Node version 15 installed on my machine. So I was waiting for the dev container to start up. But here we go. This should start up our application. There we go. Starting on that port. Give it a moment while it starts up all the various backends. Yep. So there's our API backend that's also getting started. Give it a minute. Drum roll. It'll be amazing. This application has got the design aesthetics of someone that has spent all their lives as a developer. So it looks really quite beautiful. There we go, doesn't it? That's the marvels of visual design right there. So my API hasn't started just yet. Give it a second.
By the way, do you have a GitHub URL for it?
Yes, we do. Let's see if I can start the game.
Okay.
But github.com/Aaron Powell/ GraphQL TypeScript workshop. So this is it can be done as a self-directed workshop. There's 8 steps in it, and each step is documented along the way, and they build on top of each other. So you can go check that out as well. There we go. Let's join the game. And I'm still working on it because I want to turn it into a multiplayer game. And it looks like I've got a problem with my Cosmos DB backend. So on that red error, I think we'll wrap it up today.
Like I said, that's my fault. I put you on the spot with that, so you can send all of your hate and vitriol tweets to me. So beautiful, Aaron. Thank you so much for coming on, chatting about TypeScript, chatting about React. At the very least, TypeScript is one of my favorite things. So I always just love chatting about that. So thanks for coming on and walking us through all of that.
Yep. Thanks for having me. It was good fun.
Excellent. All right. And you can find Aaron at Aaron Powell, or sorry, not at Aaron Powell, at Slace. You can see that right up above his head. You can find me at Geek Trainer, and you can find us here every Wednesday doing Web Wednesday. So thanks a lot for tuning in to everybody, and we'll see you next week. Bye.